Welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I am Sara, Custer, the Editor-in-Chief at Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, we have a conversation with a leader in the field that we think that you should be learning from. We think they're an inspiring leader. They are providing a model, but for how we can lead. But they are also playing a critical role in the shaping of the future of higher ed, and that's certainly something happening today. We also want it to be uplifting and positive because it's a Monday. That's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
Weekly Wisdom is sponsored by Mainstay, the student engagement and retention platform proven to work through peer-reviewed research, like when it helped Georgia State reduce summer melt by 21%, or in another study when Mainstay helped GSU retain 1,200 students. Check out the research and learn more at mainstay.com.
Weekly Wisdom is also part of the Innovating Together podcast, which is sponsored by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. We're always grateful for their sponsorship as well. Today, super excited to welcome, I just already snuck you in to the show, but Sara, I'll let you be able to make the formal introduction.
Yes, our guest today is Jamie Merisotis, the president and CEO of the Lumina Foundation. Before joining Lumina, Jamie co-founded and served as the president of the Institute for Higher Education Policy. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Excited to have this conversation.
This has long been something I'd hoped to have you on the show. And so it's fabulous, but it's also hearing Sara's intro. It's like, wow, you've really led two of probably some of the most significant influences shaping the architecture, the outcomes, the experience, and the kind of the framework of higher education. And so we're going to talk about your leadership, but also I think that there's something else about choosing roles that have this significant footprint in leading an entire sector. So thanks for all the work that you've done. And
thank you. Thank you. Don't underestimate luck as a strategy, though.
I understand. I don't think that's probably as big of a part as you think, but the humility is first lesson we're getting is humility. So the first thing we'd like to know is just kind of about you, and I want to give you a chance to share throughout about your journey. Again, we just learned about two significant moments in your leadership journey, but I just want to open it with, how is it that you lead? What has influenced how you lead? Is it a person? Is it an experience? Folks want to learn, like, how did you form your leadership style or your approach to it?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a wonderful question because it ties very much to my education. I'm a first generation college graduate. My parents were immigrants. Our family's from Greece, and I tell people all the time that my family didn't really know what college was except for one thing, and that was that we were going. That was the most important thing. And my parents lived their entire lives focusing on ensuring that their children would have a better opportunity than they had. My parents never made it to the middle class by most standards, but my brothers and I have three brothers. We've all been very fortunate to be successful because of education. And I'm a graduate of Bates College in Maine. And, I learned a lot about leadership early in my educational career. I happened to meet someone who is a famous person in the history of education and in civil rights in this country about a year before he passed away, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays. Dr. Mays was the president of Morehouse College for almost 30 years and was actually the first president of the Atlanta School Board. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. I went to college in Maine, but this guy happened to be on campus when I was a college freshman, as I said, a year before he passed away. And it had a profound impact on me. He was Martin Luther King Jr.'s mentor. He spoke at King's funeral. He was a real leader and really a person ahead of his time. And I think the most important thing that I learned from the model of Mays is that leading with principle, leading with purpose, and finding a way to be humble, to have that humility that you talked about is extremely important. And so, it's been such a powerful path for me to see someone like Mays, a white immigrant following the path of an African-American icon, a leader, and understanding how much I could learn from him and his model. His message has been really inspiring throughout my life.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know that. And also it's just, I think it really underscores the opportunity that exposure to a leader and that higher ed can also help facilitate, but also just the serendipity that you were able to cross paths at that such a pivotal moment in time.
I wonder if that interaction with President Mays is what maybe got you interested in higher education, or was that something that you were always interested in and wanted to get more involved in, perhaps considering your immigrant family background?
Yeah, I wish there was a great story to tell you on that. But the reality is that I was a political science major. I was looking for a policy job in Washington, D.C. I went to D.C. 2 days after I graduated. I was looking for policy jobs, and I ended up getting a job in education policy because that was a job that I could get. And it was as a policy researcher in the Washington office of the College Board. And I was literally there for like 6 or 8 months doing research on student financial aid, particularly student loans at that point, before I realized I was doing research about people like me. And, it was one of these sort of, epiphanies in your early 20s. It was like, oh, I'm doing research and I'm one of the people that is the subject of this research, right? And I realized that my path into and through education really was fortunate, and that the good fortune is in fact not a strategy. That in fact what we need is a plan, a path, a goal in order to help drive the change that's needed. And so very much I got on that path of realizing education policy, education reform was going to be my focus very early in my career. But it wasn't, it was by accident in a way. But once you realize that you are a part of what you're trying to study and influence, it becomes a very powerful motivator. And so I'm still here now, 4 decades later, still focused on that idea that improving access and success in higher education, making equity real, focusing on increasing educational attainment because it matters both to individuals and society. That very much is the thing I was thinking about in the mid 80s when I graduated from college.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bridget.
I think that's really interesting. And I want to ask you about the surprise, what elements have been most surprising about your journey. But I feel like just on the jump, I would say it's obvious that your entire career is probably a surprise to you, right? And so I'll grant that. But I also, you start becoming, you like me, get bit by the higher ed bug early. But then you could take a number of paths, right? You could have just been a college president, not just, but like you could have chosen the institutional path. You could have just, only focused on policy and stayed exclusive. Like, I'm just curious about, as you look back, is there one thing that really is the curve in the road for you once you start your journey in your career? And to that end, I'm trying to understand what is the most surprising aspect of, or like the big curveball turn that has happened along the way.
Yeah, I think most people start out their career saying, I want to get a good job. I want to lead a good life. I want to make a difference, right? All of these things that, we know from survey research, anyone at any point in their life journey, in their work journey says, I want to make good money. I want to contribute to my community. I want to support my family, all of these things. And in my case, I think it was really that idea that I could actually participate in systemic change. That was a real motivator to me. And I really, even though I studied public policy, I saw myself as an analyst, not as an influencer of the policy, until I got into it. And I realized, well, there's ways to influence it. And I ended up, I was a researcher. I was doing research. I ended up leaving the College Board and actually going and doing independent consulting for a few years, and ended up, again, serendipitously, with a client, which was a national commission that was appointed by the president and the congressional leadership. And that was focusing on rethinking the federal approach to financing of higher education. And I was hired as a consultant, and a few months later, for a variety of reasons, I ended up becoming the executive director of it. I was 27 and was running this national commission. I was so far out over my skis, I should have really tumbled over. But that moment gave me this opportunity to realize, look, it's the ideas that you need to promote. It's the fact that systemic change comes from better ideas And that's what I focused on at that point. That commission is best known. It's the commission with the longest name ever in public policy, the National Commission on Responsibilities for Financing Post-Secondary Education. I think at one point I measured it was 27 syllables. And the National Commission is best known for being the place the entity that popularized the idea, we didn't invent it, of federal direct student loans. And so this bipartisan commission, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats, with me as the executive director, published a report, came out in 1993, just as Bill Clinton was being inaugurated. So this was a Bush era commission that ended up publishing a report as Bill Clinton was being inaugurated that proposed this idea of a direct student loan system. So removing the bank subsidies out of the system and pushing more of the money to the students. That is what that commission was best known for. And that's sort of a down payment on my longer journey, right? Which is I've always focused now on this idea that we've got to focus on maximizing what's in the system in order to achieve better benefit for individuals. Because if you achieve better benefit for individuals, like the attainment goals that Lumina has tried to promote, you get more benefit for society.
Wow, that is a long word. That is a long name, but also that is a super interesting curveball.
Fascinating stuff. I would love to dig into all of the policy wonkery stuff, but that's not what we're here for. That's not.
I'm good for that though. Anytime you let me know.
That's probably we'll definitely schedule a phone call after this, Jamie. But you've done so many great things. I wonder what stands out in your mind is the proudest point in your leadership journey.
Yeah, it's hard. I don't do a lot of self-reflection. There's a lot of things I'm not good at. That's one of them. Like, what am I most proud of is tough. I'm proud of a lot of things. I'm proud of the people I work with. I'm proud of the fact that I'm associated with this idea that we should be driving the country towards a goal, this 60% attainment goal that Lumina has promoted since 2008 as a pathway to greater individual and shared prosperity. I'm very proud of that. But mostly I'm proud of the fact that I've been able to contribute in a way that I can measure, right? The attainment in the country has increased a lot, from 38% in 2008 to about 54% last year. So Lumina didn't make, any of that happen directly, of course, but we've helped to build the ecosystem. So I'm very proud of that, but it goes back to my, the beginning, which I also do feel very fortunate. And I feel a tremendous sense of humility in that sense, which is that I'm lucky to do what I do. And I still feel that way after doing it for 4 decades.
That's great. And I do think, you are being humble about the effect of setting a big goal, but I'm also caught by this idea that you were exposed at these early moments to different altitudes, and that gave you the systemic change perspective. But like looking from those altitudes, it's not possible to get where we are without you got to have some folks placing big bets.
Yeah.
And helping us raise our standards, because this whole place is set up to do what it's already doing, right? Like the sector is set up to keep doing the same stuff, head down, keep working. And so this idea that you need to lift your chin and actually aspire to something bigger, I do think that Lumina has played a critical role there, because not only of what you all have supported, but I actually think it's more that you've helped in terms of, I think about how funders operate. Pre-Lumina doing that to now, they really do think in that way of big goals. They're trying to emulate, and you've kind of been hurting.
Well, I'll add that to what I'm proud of, which is that we've helped to inform what others are doing. And what's great about that, to your point, Bridget, is that they're not doing it the same way we're doing it, right? They learned from the Lumina model and they've fashioned it to what they think can be most successful. But if we're all aiming higher, not on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of the country, on behalf of society, I think that's a really important thing for philanthropy to do. Philanthropy, I have this philosophy about philanthropy, which is this long speech, which is, there's a difference between charity and philanthropy. Charity is about helping, philanthropy is about change. But in the end, the best way that philanthropy can change things is to focus on systemic change and be very transparent about what you're trying to accomplish, and then get others to work with you on that, because you're never going to accomplish it on your own. It's that leadership model of philanthropy that I really believe is so important, and something that I think Lumina has tried to be that kind of leadership organization in the last several years.
You've outlined a few of the goals that Lumina's got, especially around getting the number of Americans with degrees, getting that up, the proportion of Americans. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges are that you guys have encountered when you were pursuing that goal, or any of the other foundation's goals?
I would say many. There's a long list of challenges, but there's a few that really stand out. One is to try to compel a sense of urgency. And I think part of the problem, this gets sort of the point that Bridget was making, which is that this is an industry, post-high school learning, higher education, workforce training, and the entire system of post-high school learning has been historically very successful, right? It's contributed to the talent base of the country. It's helped to improve individual and shared well-being. But this idea that we have to aim much higher, and that it's not just about the credentials, the degrees, certificates, or other credentials, but in fact, it's about what they represent. What do you know? What can you do with those credentials? And that sense of urgency has been hard to push, because we're working in an industry and a system that has been very successful. I do think that the challenges of recent years, which I think have been a significant blowback against higher education because of affordability, because of a lot of other issues, represents an opportunity to actually strengthen the system by using those gale force sort of headwinds that we're facing to actually compel the change that's necessary. But it's hard work. It's not something where I think, why aren't they just doing what we think they should do? There's a reason. It's hard. Change is hard. But part of, I think, our role, again, in philanthropy is to help facilitate the leaders, help to facilitate the people who are going to actually do the real work, to help them make that change that's so necessary.
I love that. I think it's also, it just makes me think, you're in a unique moment right now because you're thinking about your next goal, your next chapter. I'm guessing you're probably integrating some of those learnings into how you're approaching that.
Roughly my full-time job right now. Yes, that's exactly
I feel you. In that goal reset period, it's like nonstop. I want to ask a question about it's kind of touching on your personal background and what you've written in America's Needs Talent and in Human Work in this Age of Smart Machines, which I think are kind of finger on the pulse of the things we're thinking about these days around AI and how it's going to affect the workforce, and separately knowing your story and how transformative higher ed was, and how just like a near miss, you don't have that interaction that inspires you. I was just thinking about that, and that higher ed is struggling when it comes to accepting that we should listen to what the public is saying and thinking, right? Like that we need to adapt. I'm just thinking about how should higher ed, given what you wrote in your books, how do you think higher ed needs to adapt right now to ensure that students are equipped for this rapidly changing job market, knowing that we're still struggling with them, recognizing that they need to adapt? If they have to change one or two things, I'm just wondering if you have any insight given what you've written, but also you're probably thinking about this right now.
Yeah, I would say, look, we've been through these eras, right? We went through a long era post-World War II, the GI Bill, the Higher Ed Act, the 72 education amendments with Pell Grants, et cetera, an era of access. And then we moved into an era of attainment, which is what we've seen in the last 15 years. And both of them are really important. By the way, we haven't solved the access problem, though we've improved access. We haven't solved the attainment problem, though we've improved it. But I now think we need to be focusing on value. And there's a lot of work that's been done on value. This is not a new idea from Lumina, but this idea that value really matters is, I think, something that the sector of higher ed has to understand. And value just doesn't mean from a sort of input perspective, right? So making it more affordable, I think, is really important, right? That's key. Making it more accessible, all those things, but also value in the sense of, what can your graduates do? What do they know? What are they able to do with the credentials that you award them at the end of this process? And how are you changing what you do to meet their demands, which are important, but also to meet what society needs, not just for now, but for coming times? And there, I think higher ed's got to focus on what it has done historically well, but needs to do better, which is focus both on delivering better content knowledge, relevance to what people need, but at the same time, focus on adaptability in this idea that human work is increasingly going to be driven by what humans are uniquely qualified to do. Working with or without technology, I think you're better off if you work with the technology. But as humans, we have unique traits. We are ethical. We are critical thinkers. We know how to interpersonally communicate. There are lots of things that make us uniquely human. We are empathetic. And, so as we think about what we need to be preparing people for, it's more along the lines of things like the care economy and the fact that we need humans to work with the AI to develop more ethical strategies for improving, human well-being. And so those are the kinds of things that higher education, I think, needs to be focusing on going forward. But at the end of the day, if we don't do it, I have a fear, which is somebody else will. And I think this is sort of the wake-up call moment for higher education, which is we've got the tools to change ourselves. Let's do it before it happens to us, I guess.
That's great.
And what do you think that change would look like specifically, Jamie? I mean, I think what you said is very relevant and something that an opinion that I think a lot of people share, but kind of getting to that point is probably a different story. So is there one specific change you think that the higher education sector could make to get us a bit closer to answering some of those urgent needs that the workforce and students need?
Yeah, my staff always laughs at me when I say I've done this for too long and I worked in public policy for too long to believe that there is one thing, right? Yeah. I just don't believe that. There's lots of examples, particularly in the public policy sphere, where we spend years trying to get a single reform through, and then we get it through and we say, oh, well, that was good, but it wasn't good enough. But I will try to answer your question, which is that at the end of the day, I think the most important thing we need to do is to make sure that every single one of these degrees and credentials are transparent. And that transparency means that you should, as a consumer, be able to see what your degree will bring you, right? In terms of knowledge, in terms of your ability to, so, what's your next job? What will you be able to do in your community? Those kinds of things. That's really, really important, I think. And so I think this idea of transparency of credentials is absolutely essential. And without it, I think we're going to continue to see diminishing confidence, increasing questions about what higher ed is for, what's it worth, unless we focus on that transparency.
Yeah. No, I love how we're like, hey, magic wand this. But to be fair, that is actually a pretty good answer to the magic wand. I'm just saying. I would probably pick something like, maybe if we just accepted that people come to college to get a job, what if we could just, was just
acknowledge that, which more and more in higher ed are doing, to higher ed's credit, right?
Of course.
It's certainly a different conversation than it was, I think, in our experience 5 or 10 years ago. But you're right. It's still this sort of false dichotomy between we're not preparing people for a job, we're preparing them for life. Well, they're the same thing, right? Because the same skills you need to be successful in life are the skills we know you will need to be using in the workplace going forward, in a world where human work is going to be increasingly, influenced by what the technology can do.
Yeah. Well, I think you've had this is really great. This is a deeper level of content that our viewers are going to love. I do want to turn it back to you a bit though. So you've given us a taste of the kinds of incredible leaders that you've learned from. And I'm just curious about, I bet you've received a lot of advice in your life. But I'm curious if there is a piece of advice that is a touchstone for you that, if I were to ask, what's the best advice you've received in your career that has had the most impact? I'm curious what it was, and I'm curious who gave it to you.
Yeah, well, so I've been fortunate in that in my career, again, I keep underscoring the fact that I've been doing this for a long time, but I've been fortunate for someone who was born in the 60s to have most of my mentors and supervisors be women. And one of the things that I've learned from women as leaders is this idea that collaboration is actually key to long-term success. And I had actually my very first boss. I was the assistant editor of the newspaper at Bates College in Maine, and the first ever woman who was the editor-in-chief told me once that the key to being successful in terms of leadership is that there is no way you are going to do this on your own. You have to do this with other people to be successful. And I've taken that with me. You know, I think a lot about the fact that people sometimes confuse control for leadership. Control is not leadership. Control is actually a sign of a poor leader, in my opinion. What you want is you want to be persuasive. You want to bring others with you. And I've seen lots of these women who have been my role models, including, that very first individual when I was 20 years old. And what I learned is that idea that leadership is shared, that is not something that you do on your own, has been really important to me.
Those are good.
Excellent. Probably preaching to the choir on this call, and certainly for female editors. Is that some advice that you would give to others, or is there another bit of pearl of wisdom that you often find yourself sharing with people?
No, I don't. I'm not really good at pearls of wisdom. I have to be honest with you. That's people ask me a lot about my ideas about these things like leadership, and I've tried to just live it and exercise it. But in our field, in philanthropy, and particularly in philanthropy and higher education, this idea, what I described earlier as the leadership model of philanthropy, is a good illustration of that, right? Because it's actually this idea that we can be the one to promote the goal. We can be the one to sort of, help to build the system, et cetera, but we're not doing it on our own. There's no way. And I think that's something that I just keep coming back to in my career, which is that change doesn't happen because of an inspirational college president. Change doesn't happen because there's this one, that the governor or the president, or that's not how change happens. Change happens because individuals come together and figure out how to collaborate and lead collectively. And that's what leads to long-term change. So as an individual leader, you've got to see yourself as a part of that, and you've got to do your best in order to be able to accomplish those shared goals.
I love this, because if there is like a multi-level marketing essential oil that I sell, it is collaboration. So this is like you're hitting my my favorite. I want to wrap with seeing if there is any particular book that you find yourself most frequently recommending to other people. Our audience, when I run into our listeners and viewers, they tell me that their entire bookshelf is comprised of Weekly Wisdom recommended books. So wondering if there's one that you would contribute to their bookshelf.
Ooh, can I recommend two? Because one is just a quick one, which is I highly recommend the very old autobiography of Dr. Benjamin Mays, which is called Born to Rebel. That tells you something about the foresight he had as a civil rights leader, that he was promoting this idea of rebellion even before the civil rights era really took place. So I highly recommend that. His autobiography is very inspiring. And I would say a more recent book from, I think, 2017 or 2018 by Anne-Marie Slaughter, called The Chessboard and the Web. Neither of these, by the way, are leadership books, but they've inspired leadership from my perspective in a lot of ways. Because one of the things that Anne-Marie Slaughter talks about in The Chessboard and the Web, this is actually a book really, her background, for those of you who don't know her, she's the president of something called New America, which is a large think tank nationally. But Anne-Marie started out as a foreign policy and national security expert. She had been seen as someone who was likely to be Secretary of State or something like that. And then she wrote this article for the Atlantic magazine 20 years ago called Why Women Still Can't Have It All. And she became this sort of cause celeb in the idea of social change on a broader sense, and ended up doing lots of other things. But so this book that she wrote in 2017, 2018 is called The Chessboard and the Web. And what she talks about in the book, which uses foreign policy as the example, is how the world is changing. And in a world where foreign policy used to be driven by chess moves, right? How the US deals with Iran is very much a sort of chess game, but it's really becoming a web because of the global nature of the way the world works. But it's a web in the sense of a network, right? And so networks have different dimensions. There's peer-to-peer networks, there's web-based networks, there's distributed networks, there's lots of different networks. But this idea that there's interconnections among people, and that's how change really happens, was really inspiring to me. And it's inspiring to me as a leader, going back to my point about collaborative leadership, because her ideas in the chessboard and the web, which is now 7 or 8 years old, pre-COVID, all those things still really ring true to me. So Chessboard in the Web by Anne-Marie Slaughter.
That is great. No one has recommended that. So this is an addition, which is fantastic. But also I remember she wrote that. That was like a lightning rod for a lot of people. And since then, the work that she's led, just very impressive. But this is great. I actually don't have that book, so I'm going to have to get that. Jamie, this has been really wonderful. I feel like you have given a lot of very rich wisdom to our audience, and also given us a lot to think about in terms of the systemic change, the role that a person can play, and just the powerful influence that higher ed can have in one life, connecting to this broader idea and thinking about all that potential talent that we could unleash that hopefully has a similar kind of galvanizing moment like you do. Or you did, and leads to the kind of change they have. So, yeah, I feel like we've weaved a lot in there, but this has been fantastic, and thank you so much. And
thank you.
As always, Sara, thanks for being an excellent co-host.
Thanks, Bridget. Thanks, Jamie.